Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move you, sir, that House Bill 136 be taken from its place in the orders of the day, read for a third time by title and sponsor only, and placed upon its passage.
Motion's made and seconded that House Bill 136 be taken from its place in the orders of the day, read for the third time by title and sponsor only, and placed upon its passage. Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Bill 136, an act relating to medical marijuana and making an appropriation therefor. Representative Nemus.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from Jefferson 33 for explanation of the bill and motion thereon.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Jefferson 33 for explanation of the bill and a motion thereon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start by asking the clerk to call up House Committee Substitute 1.
Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Committee Substitute 1 to House Bill 136.
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for passage of House Committee Substitute 1.
Motion's for the adoption of House Committee Substitute 1. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor signify by voting aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. House Committee Substitute 1 is adopted. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 136 is something that we've been talking about for a number of years in Kentucky and a number of years here in this House. House Bill 136, when it is passed, which I hope that it is, will be the tightest medical marijuana bill in the country. Testifying last week, the gentleman from Florida came up and said that he looks at every state's medical marijuana bill, and he looks for 7 things that are in each bill, and those things show that whether a bill is responsible or not. Responsible as being well regulated and also available to patients. And he noted that House Bill 136 will be the first bill in the country that has all 7. So he says immediately once we pass this bill, his organization and organizations like his will consider Kentucky's at the top of the heap. Now, something I'm very proud of. We've worked on this bill a long time. We've met with stakeholders from law enforcement, stakeholders, constituents, regular folks, patients, physicians, chiropractors, I mean, you name it, we've been there. Pharmacists, everybody. We've met with everybody. Kentucky League of Cities endorsed this bill last week. We met with even local elected officials. We met with veterans, moms and dads all across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So we've met with a lot of folks. So I'm not going to go through each section. I'm just going to say in broad strokes what the bill does, and then answer any questions that we might have. And I understand there might be a 4th amendment or 2 that might be called. So the licenses that are created are these. First of all, you have a cultivator, and that's the grower. Then you have a processor, and that's the entity that takes the raw material and puts it into a final product. Then you have a dispensary, and that's where folks go get the medicine that they need. The dispensary can only sell medical marijuana. It can't sell Snicker bars. It can't sell Tic Tacs. It can't sell Coca-Colas, liquor, anything. It can only sell medical marijuana. As you can see, we're very, gentleman from Jessamine, you can't sell Reese's Pieces either. As you can see, we're being very serious about making sure that we have strong walls to protect this program and make it very strong, make it tight. And so that's what we've done. And then a 4th, so we've got the cultivator, the processor, the dispensary, but then we also have the safety tester. And the safety tester, Mr. Speaker, pardon the pun, there can be no contamination, cross-pollination, if you will, of the ownership between the first 3 and the safety tester, which is important to note that unlike today, the medical marijuana folks will be using has been tested to make sure that it's not laced with products and with things that are harmful to our folk. It is, has been tested, it's been licensed all throughout and regulated. So that's the licenses that are created. I also want to note a few more provisions of the bill and then perhaps take questions. And that is, there is an opt-out provision. So this will bring medical marijuana to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. But if there's a particular jurisdiction that doesn't want medical cannabis, medical marijuana, then they can opt out. Your fiscal courts can opt out of the bill and not be covered by this and for their people if they think it's the wrong thing. So also the final thing I want to mention is, as I said, we've taken a lot out of the bill that I initially filed, and before me, the gentleman from Fleming, and let me stop to give the gentleman from Fleming credit for bringing this, not only the bill a couple years ago, but elbowing me nonstop and saying, here's why you need to be for this, here's why it's right, and here's why it's good. And so he is the architect of this bill more than anyone in this chamber. But one thing we took out that I wasn't happy with, and still as I stand here today, I'm not, and I know a lot of you are, and we did it because we need to get this thing rolling, is we took out smoking. There's no smoking. I believe that sometimes it's appropriate, not all the time, but sometimes it's appropriate because smoking is the quickest way in. And if you have PTSD, for example, it might be the best means into the body. We took that out. It's important to note that there is no smoking in House Bill 136. There's also no public usage. There's a lot of talk about what happens when a police officer might pull someone over. If they pull someone over and the product is out of the package, much less than it being used, it's unlawful. If someone is in public, they must have their card, and they must have the product in an inner package and an outer package. If it's out of that package, it's unlawful. They're breaking the rules. They're subject to losing their card and being tried. So, no smoke and no public usage at all. Mr. Speaker, I'm assuming that there might be some questions and some floor amendments, so with that, I'll yield and answer any questions that might come my way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Would you like to move for passage, gentlemen?
I'd like to move for passage as amended by House Committee Substitute 1.
Question before the body is passage of House Bill 136 as amended by House Committee Substitute 1. There does appear to be some discussion. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Laurel 89 for discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could you have the clerk report House Floor Amendment number 10?
Sir Clerk, please report.
House Floor Amendment 10 to House Bill 136.
Gentleman from Laurel.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of this body, I had some concern when the conditions were taken out of this piece of legislation. I had some concern because the expert testified there were only 4 conditions that showed clinical significant improvement in outcomes that were noted in the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine article that was published with studies of over 24,000 patients. So out of all of those conditions that they looked at, they only found 4 that truly showed a clinical significant improvement in outcomes. And I felt like those conditions needed to be in this legislation, and that's what these providers need to be recommending this medication for until more clinical proof is established for the other conditions. So with that, I would ask for this body to adopt House Floor Amendment number 10.
Motion is for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 10. Is there any discussion? Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a friendly amendment. I, along with the gentleman from Laurel and the gentleman from Todd, have worked on this issue, and we believe we support this amendment. I obviously believe that the conditions should be much broader than they are, but this is a good start. And plus, I have to note that there is a committee that's been put together of 8 physicians, 4 patient advocates, and a pharmacist that can add conditions or remove conditions as the science would dictate. I wish the conditions were larger, but as a position of compromise, this is an amendment that I want to thank the gentleman from Laurel for bringing, and that I support.
Motion is for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 10. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, those in favor signify by voting aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. No. House Floor Amendment 10 is adopted. Question before the body is passage of House Bill 136. Is there any further discussion? Chair recognizes the lady from Mercer 55 for discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I comment on the bill and hopefully call a floor amendment?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Make no mistake, this body will have to revisit this same issue in the very near future if it passes and becomes law to take care of the unintended consequences. The World Health Organization, McMaster University, the District of Columbia, Department of Health, and Health Canada have already identified contraindications for medicinal marijuana. This is not a comprehensive and exhaustive list, but those contraindications include acute psychosis, unstable psychotic conditions, cardiovascular, immunological, liver and kidney disease, arrhythmia, the use of antidepressants, pardon me with some of these pronunciations, tricyclic antidepressants, antipsychotics, beta blockers, Coumadin, Sandimmune, beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, and more. So these are medicines and contraindications that, again, have already been identified. And I think to help lessen the unintended consequences that we will have in the future, I would like to call House Floor Amendment 7 and ask for consideration with this body, please.
Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Floor Amendment 7 to House Bill 136.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Floor Amendment 7 would be included on page 27 of the committee sub. Lines 21, 23 are affected. It would just add the following sentence as subsection C. The provider will not be able to issue medicinal marijuana if they need to provide a written certification for the use of medicinal cannabis to a patient who is currently taking a prescription drug that contraindicates the use of cannabis for medicinal purposes. And again, I've just reviewed several of those that have already been identified by these respected health organizations, and I would encourage passage of House Floor Amendment 7 by the body.
Motion is for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 7. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the lady from Mercer for the spirit with which she brings this amendment. She's trying to, I think, make sure that this is safely provided to people, in which I think the sponsor, I know the sponsor, and I think all the co-sponsors and supporters support that goal. I want to note that this is from a friend, but is not friendly, because in the way that we say it's not friendly, because this has the ability to gut the program from the beginning. That's not the intent, I don't believe, but it has the potential to do that. And I would say this, there's no drug that is, or no medicine that's listed in this floor amendment, and so there's no drug specified, and we already have these protections built in. And how do we have that? We have the physician. A patient can't get this without having a recommendation from their physician that they have a bona fide relationship with, not just anybody. They can't go physician shopping. So we have the physician already looking at this particular patient, what is going on in their life, what's going on in their treatments, what drugs they might be on, what conditions they have. And even more than that, after working with my friend, the gentleman from Warren, we have a pharmacist involved. So what happens in this bill, under this bill, is the patient would go from the physician and then to the Department of Health to get their card to make sure that everything's on the up and up. The Department of Health could also say no. And then the patient has to go to the pharmacist to make sure that there are no contraindications and that everything is right for this particular patient. Here's my fear. Medical marijuana, and why I say it could gut the program from the beginning, medical marijuana might contraindicate with a host of conditions or prescription drugs, but the good might outweigh the bad. And that's not for us to decide. My friends on the other side, and they are my friends, Mr. Speaker, my friends on the other side say quite often, we ought not be practicing medicine. This whole bill removes bureaucrats and removes legislators, elected officials, from the practice of medicine. This floor amendment puts it back in. So my request is, let's allow the physician, the Department of Health, and the pharmacist to make the right decision for that individual patient. Sometimes they might have contraindications, but the good might outweigh the bad. Let's let the professionals make that decision, and I urge you to vote no on this floor amendment.
Motion is for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 7. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, those in favor signify by voting aye. Aye. I apologize, lady from Kenton. I did not see your button on. You're recognized to discuss this amendment.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this amendment. I think this is a very fair proposal. I would agree that there are substances or interactions with this substance that we don't know about. And I would submit that these contraindications could really cause some serious problems for individuals who are hoping for true relief for their symptoms or their disease process. I feel like we don't know enough about this medication or this substance, which is not actually, has not been developed into a medication yet. And I would just, I think that this is a very good amendment. I think that we do need to be very careful, and that since we have providers who will be recommending this as a medication, I think it is completely in their purview to indicate whether or not they feel that there's the potential for a dangerous side effect with this substance. So I would like a roll call vote on this amendment.
Lady from Mercer.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the comments from my great colleagues. I would like to mention that the conditions and the medications I listed are not outliers. They're not out of the ordinary. Statins, calcium blockers, all of these heart medications and blood pressure medications are very common. A lot of our citizens are on those. So if we're going to set them up to have adverse contradictions that we already know have been proven, again, by these great medical organizations, I think we're really doing a disservice to our citizens. We're going to have to revisit this to address unintended consequences, but we know these are going to be coming. So I say we address those now, and I appreciate everyone's full support on House Floor Amendment 7, and I call for a roll call, please.
Motion is for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 7. Gentleman from Greenup, do you wish to comment on the amendment?
Yes, sir.
Recognized to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment deals with the drug interaction of THC with other products. In the liver, everybody listen to me real close, we have enzymes that destroy things that come into our body. That's the reason the blood from your stomach goes to your liver first, because it's your filter. It's well documented in pharmacology and pharmacokinetics that if you have an enzyme and another product that uses that same enzyme, one of them's going to get out of the body quicker than the other one. For example, she brought up Coumadin, which is warfarin, which you most know as rat poison. Everybody knows that if you take aspirin with rat poison, you're going to hemorrhage. Well, there's a documented case where a person was a chronic user of THC and they hemorrhaged and died. So that's what it is. It's like all of us trying to get off that door at the same time. We just can't do it. So there's a backload of the metabolite in here and causes the side effects. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Creighton, you wish to comment on the amendment?
Yes, sir.
Recognized to do so.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the House, we're going to vote on this bill today primarily because it's an emotional issue, not because it is fact-driven. I submit that this is a good amendment. When you go to the pharmacy and get prescriptions, you'll come out with paperwork that's almost as heavy as the prescriptions themselves, telling you what is good, what is bad, what to look for, etc. And I submit that we need to do things in similar fashion if we are, in fact, going to pretend to call this a medicine. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lady from Letcher, you wish to comment on the amendment?
Yes,
Recognized
Mr.
to do
Speaker,
so.
thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, 33 other states in the District of Columbia have already done this. 24 years ago was the first one in 1996 in California. The other states don't have this contraindication language. People are not dying. Doctors know what they're doing. Doctors can be trusted not to prescribe medication for folks that is going to harm them when they know what other medications that they're on. And opioids have tons of contraindications. Sometimes they're necessary anyway, and doctors know when to do that. And this amendment, with all due respect to all of my colleagues, is not needed.
Motion is for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 7. Is there any further discussion of the amendment? Seeing none, roll call having been called for by two or more members, clerk will sound the chimes. Those in favor vote aye, those opposed nay, and the roll call machine is open for your vote. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? Clerk will take the roll. There being 29 members voting aye, 56 members voting nay, House Floor Amendment 7 is defeated. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Perry 84 for discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to call a floor amendment, please.
Yes, sir.
I'd ask the clerk to report House Floor Amendment 14.
Mr. Clerk, please report.
Floor Amendment 14 to House Bill 136.
Gentleman from Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment would go in lines 7 and 8 of page number 41 on the House Committee sub. And it basically, when a card holder or a medical marijuana patient passes away, then they would have 10 days to return, the family would have 10 days to return the medical marijuana to the dispensary for legal destruction. I move for passage, Mr. Speaker.
Motions for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 14. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be short. This is a friendly amendment.
Motions for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 14. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, those in favor signify by voting aye. Those opposed, nay. House Floor Amendment 14 is adopted. Gentleman from Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could you ask the clerk to report House Floor Amendment 15, please?
Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Floor Amendment 15 to House Bill 136.
Gentleman from Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This floor amendment would allow law enforcement personnel and dispensary agents to access medical cannabis sales data record in dispensary agents pursuant to Section 22 of this Act. Move for passage.
Motions for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 15. Is there any discussion? Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This was already in the bill by implication, so I commend my friend, the gentleman from Perry, for bringing this up and making it explicit. I do want to note for the record that this is for the purpose of enforcing the medical marijuana bill and not for the purpose of getting private information from patients. So with that understanding, and I'm comforted by that, this is, Mr. Speaker, a friendly amendment.
Motions for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 15. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, those in favor signify by voting aye. Those opposed, nay. House Floor Amendment 15 is adopted. Gentleman from Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you ask the clerk to report House Floor Amendment 16, please?
Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Floor Amendment 16 to House Bill 136.
Gentleman from Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this amendment would be on page 111, line 21, and it would make the trafficking in any amount of medical marijuana that is from a dispensary, whether in pill form, oil, due to the amount of THC, 35% and 70% in the oils. Any trafficking in any amount of medical marijuana would be classed as a Class D felony. I move for passage.
Motions for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 16. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Chair recognizes the gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My friend, the gentleman from Perry, brought one too many. The first two were friendly. This one, although by friendly, a friend, one I would consider a close friend of mine, this one is, in the lingo that we used, unfriendly. And the reason is this. There's two reasons. One is, obviously, most people in this body understand that I'm not for the introduction of new or the unnecessary expansion of existing felonies. This would make regular people who are just trying to, this would expand a felony. But here's what the main reason. The bill already has punishments, and we want there to be punishments for misconduct. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about when someone traffics the medicine that they receive from a dispensary. So what is the penalties in the bill today? The penalties in the bill today, as it exists without this floor amendment, are that person loses their card forever. That's pretty steep. So they lose their card forever, and they're also subject to existing laws. So if it's more than 8 ounces of marijuana, it's already a felony. If it's less than 8 ounces, it goes down and maybe a misdemeanor, depending on the misdemeanor at Class A. But they already subject to existing laws. This, I think, is goes too far. They already lose their card if they misbehave in this way, and they're subject to the existing laws, which are, in my view, already too harsh with 8-ounce possession. But so it's already unlawful in this bill to traffic it as in the ways that I just said. So I would request that everyone vote no on this well-intended floor amendment.
Gentleman from Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, gentleman from Jefferson. We would disagree on this basically because of my years of experience with the High Drug Task Force and seeing basically the devastation of people in the opioid crisis. But not only that, in the methamphetamine, cocaine arena, all those different drugs. If this truly is a medicine, most other medicines, Schedule 2 and 3 are a Class D felony already. With the levels of THC that will be present in the oils from medical marijuana, it's already been trafficked here on the streets of Kentucky, the hollers of Kentucky, with a local Martin City police officer that arrested a man with vials of THC from Colorado. It's already been seen on the streets. These medical marijuana vials that are 70% THC, when they're put into a vape, can cause great damage to young people and to everyone that would take it. So I think we need to take this serious. This amendment is a really serious amendment. It's not something that I just said, well, let's make it a Class D felony. If you came from the background that I came from and you see the devastation of all the drugs, but they started out with marijuana. It's been said that marijuana is not a gateway drug. I've got 20 years experience that says different. The gentleman from McGoffin has the same or more years of experience. And so I would ask that you pass this amendment. I think it's an important amendment, and I think it would serve a great purpose in the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Motion is for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 16. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Gentleman from McGoffin, you wish to comment on the amendment? Lady from Muhlenberg on the amendment? Roll call having been called for by 2 or more people. Clerk will sound the chimes. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed, nay. And the roll call is open for your vote. All members voted? Clerk will take the roll. Being 39 members voting aye, 50 members voting nay, House Floor Amendment 16 is defeated. Gentleman from Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do have one more at the request of the lady from Madison. Would you please have the clerk call House Floor Amendment 17, please?
Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Floor Amendment 17 to House Bill 136.
Gentleman from Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This would basically eliminate the use of the medical marijuana oil in a vape. It would not allow it to be in a vape. I move passage.
Motions for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 17. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This would prohibit the uses of vape for anybody under age 21. And so we believe it brings it in line with things that the federal government has recently done and that we're doing elsewhere in this session. So we don't take issue with this amendment, and I'll be voting yes.
Motions for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 17. Lady from Jefferson 41, do you wish to discuss the amendment? You're recognized to do so.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I actually don't really understand at all what this sentence means. Not sell or dispense medicinal cannabis products intended for consumption by vaporized in and card holder who is less than 21 years of age. Could the presenter please explain what this means?
He will yield to that question. Gentleman from Perry.
Just basically means that anyone under the age of 21 would not be allowed to use any medical marijuana or products in a vape system.
Lady from Jefferson, 41.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. This sentence actually doesn't make sense, is my confusion. So I just need some understanding about whether or not there are some words missing or something, because I don't actually really understand the sentence at all. So could the sponsor look at the sentence and see if it actually makes sense? I understand the point, but the sentence doesn't make sense.
Gentleman from Perry.
Mr. Speaker, I would yield to the lady from Madison if she could answer that question.
Chair recognizes the lady from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The intent is that the form of vaping would not be allowed for children under the age of 21, similar to what we're doing with other vaping products.
Lady from Jefferson, 41.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I totally get the point of this floor amendment. The language is incorrect. There is clearly something missing, and if you're going to pass this, I want you to get it correct before it's passed. So if the lady from Madison wants to read the sentence again to see if there's something that's missing, I would appreciate that.
Lady from Madison, would you like to clarify this?
I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Jefferson.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you. I want to thank the lady from Jefferson for bringing this up. It is clearly a typographical error in the bill drafting process. This is what lawyers know as a scrivener's error, and so this is something that the statutory reviser can fix. But it's an important issue that important issue that my friend, the lady from Jefferson, has brought up. I believe it will be corrected, if not in the Senate, throughout this process, certainly by the statutory reviser. But thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lady from Jefferson, 41.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, ma'am. Gentleman from Henderson, you wish to discuss the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I share the same confusion of the lady from Jefferson. And I ask rhetorically how far we will allow the reviser to fix these kinds of errors. When they come to the floor, these things need to be right. That's all I offer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, gentlemen. Motions for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 17. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, those in favor signify by voting aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. House Floor Amendment 17 is adopted. Gentleman from Laurel, I apologize. You had a second amendment earlier that you had asked to call, and I failed to recognize you, so you're now recognized for discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could you have the clerk report House Floor Amendment number 11, please?
Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Floor Amendment 11 to House Bill 136.
Gentleman from Laurel.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, this is just some very simple cleanup language that I had spotted and I talked to the bill sponsor about. Ordinarily, in prescribing controlled substances and medication, this entire list of practitioners are listed: physician, dentist, podiatrist, optometrist, and we're simply removing dentist, podiatrist, and optometrist from the list of the people that can recommend or prescribe this medication. I would ask for adoption of House Floor Amendment number 11.
Motions for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 11. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my friend, the gentleman from Laurel, for speaking with me about this amendment. I can't explain it any better than he did. We brought the statutory section over from the list of professionals that could already prescribe controlled substances and just brought it over and copy and pasted. We didn't want to make judgments and take any out. I think this is an improvement on the bill to take, for example, podiatrists out, and so this we consider a friendly amendment, Mr. Speaker.
Motion is for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 11. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, those in favor signify by voting aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. House Floor Amendment 11 is adopted. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Fayette, 45, for discussion of the matter.
Are we doing amendments or just the bill? Is this the bill, Mr.
Recognized
Speaker?
to discuss the bill.
Thank you. I would like to discuss the bill if I could.
Yes, sir.
And I would like to see if the sponsor would yield to a question.
He will yield. He will yield.
Thank you. As I understand, the original bill did allow for smoking of marijuana. And as I understand your original testimony, that it was with great angst and apprehension that you allowed smoking to be taken out of the House Committee substitute. Is that correct?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
I didn't say great angst, but it's my belief that the studies that I've read have shown that in some conditions smoking is better, and therefore I wanted to leave it to the professionals to make that determination. So the answer is, if you're asking me, did I take it out over objection? Yes, I think smoking ought to be in the bill because I believe that's what the studies show is better in some conditions.
Gentleman from Fayette.
Thank you. May I comment on the bill, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, sir.
And that raises one of the issues, and actually it raises more than one issue, but I think what I'd like the body to consider, and these are my concerns, and I suspect they're the concerns of some others, and this is a difficult issue. And I know that there are people who are out there who want this very badly. I understand that. But I think it's important, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen in the House, to have maybe a brief history of some of this and to put it into context. You know, years ago we had people who wanted to come forward and legalize hemp. And hemp, as I understand the science, gentleman from Greenup, hemp is cannabis as well. It's just a different type of cannabis. And that never could get any traction, Mr. Speaker, because there was a concern that if you allowed people to grow hemp as cannabis, that the next thing they would be doing is growing marijuana. And there was a concern, and that could never get through. Couldn't get a vote on it. People were concerned. Law enforcement was concerned. Local mayors and county judges. Corrections. People were concerned about that. So that issue could never come forward. Then eventually the argument changed, the supporters changed, and the argument then evolved to, well, hemp is not marijuana, and therefore we need to pass this because it'll help our farmers. And who doesn't want to help our farmers? Every one of us wants to help our farmers. And part of the argument was that, gentleman from Graves, was that there are some other qualities of hemp that could help individuals who are ill. And we had, Mr. Speaker, people who would bring, and it's heart-wrenching, that would bring children to committees who were suffering with seizure disorders, and we were told, and we were given studies that said that the hemp oil, the CBD oil, I think is what it's called, would help these young children with their seizures. And that was another compelling reason. So we were going to help young children with epilepsy and seizures, and we were going to help the farmers. And that was enough argument, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House, to get the hemp over the hump, and it got passed. And then we've got, we got a federal farm bill that went through and maybe eased it a little bit more. And now we're told that the hemp oil isn't enough for seizures. We need marijuana. And maybe it's true. I don't know. I know some of the what I would consider the experts in this body have questions about it, and I'll leave it to them. But my concern is now we're being asked to pass something that I fear will not be the end of it. And the issue with the smoking crystallizes my concern, because for years gentleman from Jefferson, we've had individuals who've been coming up here literally for years who have wanted us to legalize smoking marijuana. And they wanted us to do it, and it wasn't for medical purposes. They just wanted it legalized. They wanted to be able to smoke marijuana. And we resisted that. And a lot of these same individuals and same groups then pivoted, it seems, to push for medical marijuana. And then if you look at some of the states, Mr. Speaker, I think the statistic's been given that there's some 32, 33 states that have passed medical marijuana. And then of those, at least based on some of the studies I've seen, at least 12 have legalized recreational marijuana. Another 12 or so have decriminalized the possession and by implication, the use of marijuana. That's 24 out of actually 32 states in one District of Columbia. That's 75%. And I don't think it's an exaggeration, or I don't think it's an unfounded concern to say that this is just another step in the process. Now, I'm going to tell everyone in here, you know, as sure as you're sitting there, everybody in here knows that. As sure as you're sitting here, if this passes, it won't be a year before the attempt will be to you know, the smoking's better, so we need to legalize that next. Now, I see a lot of heads nodding, and I see a lot of people who are avoiding eye contact, and I get that. But I've been here for a couple years now, and I can tell you this is how this process works, and that's why this history, Mr. Speaker, is important, because it is a progression. And then if we get smoking for medical marijuana purposes, what's going to be next? How long is it going to be? How long is it going to be before we start hearing the drumbeat that, well, and we're hearing it already, gentlemen from Grays, that, you know, this hemp was supposed to be, it was supposed to be better than sliced bread. It was going to help our farmers, and now I'm hearing that maybe it's not producing as much as we'd all hoped, that we were all told, that we were all promised. And how long is it going to be before we hear the drumbeat, Mr. Speaker, that we got to help our farmers? And we will all want to help our farmers. And the argument's going to be, well, the only way we can help them now is we need to legalize recreational use of marijuana. Let them grow that and the hemp, probably in different fields, I would guess, I would hope. And then we're going to have budget concerns. Because, you know, as I understand this bill, we're not taxing this medical marijuana. But gee whiz, if we get recreational use marijuana, I'm sure we're going to want to tax it, Lady Fayette. And we're going to want to use that money for schools and everything else. And there's not a person in here right now that's looking at me that doesn't know that that's coming. It's going to come. I hope it doesn't, but you know it's going to come. And as I mentioned not too long ago when we had this issue, you know, marijuana isn't just a carefree, happy-go-lucky kind of thing you just do on a whim. It's a drug. And I don't think it's good for our society. I don't think it's good for our people. And I fear that's where we're going, but step by step. And there are all kinds of statistics. I know we've all been given pieces of paper with things on them that tell us about addictions and teen use and whatnot. I've been given some stuff that says that states that have medical marijuana have the highest incident of children 12 to 17 using marijuana and not for medical purposes. These are just more statistics. And it's a drug, it'll get a hold of you. and it is a gateway drug. And we've had people come to our committees, and it is gut-wrenching, Mr. Speaker, and they shed real tears because they want this. They believe it's going to help them. But I'm going to tell you, there are tears on the other side, too. There are tears from family members who've seen lives shattered, families broken because of marijuana use. And that's not hyperbole, that's real. And so that's my concern with this legislation. Is it going to be just medical marijuana without any smoking? We want to have good, strong laws to make sure we never get to recreational use marijuana. How long is that going to last? How long is it going to be before you don't start hearing that legislation that's going to be put before you? And you're going to hear those same arguments again. I understand what the gentleman's trying to do. My heart breaks for those people too. But this is a balancing test. Is the good going to outweigh the harm? Is the good going to outweigh the harm? Because if you lift the tent up a little and let this nose in, you ain't going to stop it. Everybody in here knows that. So I would encourage you to consider that when you're making your vote. If it truly is medicine, then let's let it be studied. Let's let the FDA get a hold of it. Let's let it be regulated the way other medicines are. Let's let pharmacies, gentlemen from Laurel, dispense it. And let's handle it that way. I would encourage you to think long and hard about your vote, because he's got compelling arguments. I don't deny that. But I want you to think in your heart what's coming. Now, I suspect there'll be one or two or more who get up and say, no, that's not going to come. We've drawn a line in the sand. It's why they'll never ask for smoking, really. Why they might want smoking, but they're never going to ask for recreational use marijuana. We've drawn a line in the sand. That's never going to happen. Well, Mr. Speaker, if you just give us hemp, we'll never come back and ask for marijuana. That's never going to happen, really. Yet here we are. So I would encourage you to consider that. Mr. Speaker, I can't support this legislation because of those fears. Those are heartfelt concerns, gentlemen from Edmondson. And I know you've thought about this as well. I know everyone in here has. There's a lot of us in here, Mr. Speaker, I know who have dreaded this day. And there are a lot who couldn't wait for this day to get here because it is an emotional issue. But think about the good of the whole state. Think about our children. Think about the message we're really sending them, gentlemen from Jefferson. Think about that. And I would encourage you, sadly, but I think appropriately, to vote against this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Greenup 98 for discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to call for an amendment, floor amendment.
Yes, sir.
Ask the clerk to call for House Floor Amendment 8.
Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Floor Amendment 8 to House Bill 136.
Gentleman from Greenup.
This is on, let's see, I can't see with my glasses, sorry. Page 116. When a person is admitted to a hospital, if they have CHS, which means they've smoked marijuana for a long time and saturated their receptors, they sometimes come in screaming and vomiting. So we're asking that that be reported by the hospital to the department. It's called in the bill. The reason I did that was, you know, a couple years ago, we added toxicology from emergency rooms to opioid people to reduce neonatal absence syndrome babies, and it really worked. So with that, I ask for passage.
Motion is for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 8. Is there any discussion? Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Floor Amendment 8 just says that if someone, as the gentleman just said, presents to the hospital and they have the condition that needs to be reported, the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, then they report that. That's not a big deal. So we support that. This floor amendment, it's a friendly amendment, Mr. Speaker.
Motion is for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 8. Is there any discussion? Lady from Meade, do you wish to discuss the amendment? Is there any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor signify by voting aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. House Floor Amendment 8 is adopted. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Magoffin for discussion of the matter. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Christian 8 for discussion of the matter.
Will the gentleman yield to a question?
He will yield.
Yes, Mr. Gentleman from Jefferson. Can you please look at page 75? Looks like G, 75G. And while you're doing so, I will read the statement. It says, a requirement that all raw plant material packaged or sold in the state by marked or labeled, it's not intended for consumers' consumption by smoking. Is that the stopgap that we're going to assume that we can't smoke this? Because you're saying raw products in the bottle, but yet there's going to be a label on the bottle that you can't smoke it. Is that the stopgap of not smoking this?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's one of them. The other one is it violates our penal code that already exists today. So it's not just a label on the packaging, but it's also that the penal code that exists currently still applies. So smoking would be a violation of our penal code.
Gentleman from Christian.
All right, thank you. May I ask another question, sir?
He will yield another question.
I wanted to bring light to the current law that is U.S. Code Title 18, Part 1, and this is federal law, and it says, it shall be unlawful for any person to sell or otherwise dispose of any firearm or ammunition to any person knowing or having reasonable cause to believe that such person, and then it jumps to 3, is an unlawful user or addicted to any controlled substance as defined in Section 102 of the Controlled Substances. If you jump over to the controlled substances, it says on 16, paragraph A, subject to subparagraph B, the term marijuana means all parts of the plant cannabis sativa, whether growing or not, the seeds thereof, the resin extracted from any part of such plant, and every compound, manufacture, salt, derivative, mixture, or preparation of such plant. Does this mean that if you're a marijuana card holder and you're a gun holder, that you are illegally owning a firearm?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the gentleman from Christian for this very thoughtful question. It's one that I had and wanted to make sure I got the answer to, because it's extremely important to myself and as a gun owner and a lot of the good people I represent and that everyone in here represents. The answer, in my understanding, is no. you couldn't purchase one from an FFL dealer because you have to fill out the form that has the language that the gentleman from Christian just identified. But I believe that you could possess a firearm. And I would also note that that language applies equally well to all opioids that are already on the market and prescribed for patients.
Gentleman from Christian.
All right, thank you.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from McGoffin for discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield to a question?
He will yield.
Gentlemen, how much from taxes on this piece of legislation will the state receive?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
The state should yield nothing. And the reason for that, the gentleman from McGoffin, is because we made a decision decades ago that we don't tax medications at the retail level. So the overall yield, if you will, to the state will be zero. What we do have in the bill, gentleman from McGoffin, is a 12% excise tax. So what that means is when the cultivator grows, there's a 12% excise tax. And here's the reason it's 12%. I asked LRC to give us a number that would cover the expenses and not make a dollar off the back of sick and poor people, but not cost the state money to create a new bureaucracy. So there's a 12% excise tax. There's also licensing fees, as every state has, that are on, I believe, page 43 of the bill, gentleman from McGoffin, and they are dependent upon how many square footage you're growing. And then also there's an annual fee that depends upon annual receipts of the licensee. So that's the money aspect of the bill, of the incoming. Does that answer your question, gentleman from McGoffin?
Gentleman from McGoffin.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. May I yield to another question?
He will yield.
Gentlemen, do you have any estimated numbers as to what these excise taxes and these license fees would generate revenue-wise for the state?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Again, the hope is zero. If it generates money, then I'm going to be coming back here to reduce it because I don't want to make money for the Commonwealth of Kentucky on the back of sick and poor people. So we're hoping it breaks even on paying for the administration and the regulation of the program, but that it doesn't bring a dollar in. If it does, then we've got work to do because we don't want to hurt our poor people and our sick people.
Gentleman from McGoffin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I call floor amendment, please?
Yes, sir.
I'd ask the clerk to report House Floor Amendment 5, please.
Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Floor Amendment 5 to House Bill 136.
Gentleman from McGoffin.
Mr. Speaker, members of this body, what House Floor Amendment 5 does, it says that a dispensary shall not dispense or sell medical cannabis to a minor. It also says that they shall not dispense or sell more medical cannabis to a cardholder than he or she is legally permitted to purchase at the time of the transaction. Also on this, it places some responsibility on the dispensary or dispensary agent if they fail to comply with subsection 2, C, D, E, and F, or G, that the dispensary or the dispensary agent would then be liable by civil action for compensatory and punitive damages and reasonable attorney fees to any person or the representative of the estate of any person who sustains injury, death, or loss to person or property or as a result of the failure to comply with these subsections. I would be happy to answer any questions about this floor amendment, and if there's no questions, I would move adoption of House Floor Amendment 5, Mr. Speaker.
Motions for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 5. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I want to commend my friend, the gentleman from McGoffin, for bringing this. This is another clarification, and I think it's a good one. But we consider this floor amendment a friendly one. I do want to make one very emphatic clarification here because there are thousands of mothers and fathers who are watching on KET as we speak. This would prohibit selling medical cannabis to a minor, not for a minor. So if a caregiver, a parent, has a child who has a condition for which the physician believes, his physician believes that it would be helpful for that child, then the caregiver and the parent, alongside the physician, can get the medication for the child. But what this does is it says that a 17-year-old can't just walk into a dispensary or anyone under 18 and purchase this product. And so with that understanding and that, I want to be very clear for the mothers and fathers watching, this is a welcome and a friendly amendment.
Motion is for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 5. Is there any discussion of the amendment? Seeing none, those in favor signify by voting aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. House Floor Amendment 5 is adopted. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Hardin, 25, for discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is a tough vote, and I've long said that I do believe that a well-regulated medical marijuana makes sense. We allow opioids to be given to folks who need them. Why wouldn't we let doctors and pharmacies do the same thing? So I've often said, and I stand by that, that we need a well-regulated, and how I define that is a little different than this bill defines it, unfortunately. I define well-regulated meaning doctor prescribed and pharmacy filled. And due to some federal regulations, that's preventing us from doing that. Doctor prescribed and pharmacy filled is the only way to make sure we don't have to have all these crazy amendments that we're talking about with contraindications from the lady from, I won't blow it, I'm going to mess it up. Mercer, thank you. That's what pharmacists do. That's their job, is to look at the patients, all their different prescriptions, and make sure they don't have 4 different doctors prescribing 4 different medicines that there's a contraindication for that the other doctors weren't aware of. We're taking that out, in my opinion. Doctor prescribed, pharmacy filled is a good thing. The good gentleman from Fayette made a good point as well. A lot of times we have unintended consequences in this house, this body. We have good intentions, and I do believe the gentleman from Jefferson's intentions are as valid as anybody's in here. He wants to help those who need help, and I agree with that, and I do too. But we often find these slippery slopes where we start down a path, and that path forks off, and then that path forks off, and that other path forks off, and we find out we're nowhere near where we intended to be to begin with. So let me just tell you a little bit, some knowledge that I have, and knowledge, just some things that happened to me. And I'm not going to go into the fact that my local law enforcement is against this bill. They don't think it's properly regulated. I can go into all the reasons for that, and I'm not going to. I want to talk about what the gentleman from Fayette talked about, and that is where we could go, where this could end up. Back several years ago, and I'm not sure what year it was, so I don't want to misstate. I was a fairly new legislator, and I've always said I'm for well-regulated medical marijuana, doctor prescribed, pharmacy filled. And the lobbyist for the medical marijuana group called me, and we were talking on the phone, and something gave me a sense about this fella, that there was more than medical to his call. I got this feeling, and I don't know what it was, that he wanted more than medical, that he wanted what Colorado had. This was several years ago when Colorado was the big news. So I played him. You guys ever played a lobbyist? I feel bad, I played him. And I said, this sounds great, but what do we got to do to get this to full recreational? And I acted like I meant it to the depth of my heart. He said, I'm glad you asked, sir, because this is exactly the first step we got to take to get there. As soon as we get to medical marijuana, we'll start working on the full recreational. Folks, that wasn't hearsay. That was his lips to my ears. That's what's being pushed on us. And I believe the good gentleman from Jefferson, who is trying to do the right thing for folks who need medicines, is in danger of being played himself. That lobbyist, when I called him out on that, said, sorry, you just failed the test, sir. I don't want full recreational. I just want to help those who are sick. He started backtracking. Well, you know, my conversation was done. I've never had much conversation with him again. In fact, he denies that we had that conversation the last time I talked to him. I thought that was interesting. So, gentlemen from Fayette, 3 years ago, I got to spend a week at the Army War College. Greatest experience of my life, well, one of them. And one of the other elected officials who was there was the Secretary of State of Colorado. Now, this is before, I was still had an open mind, and I still do have an open mind, but I had this open mind, that, maybe we need to do this recreational. This is before I had this, I was still trying to figure out where I stood on this thing, and I didn't know, and I hadn't talked, and I was a new legislator. And he looked at me and he said, I know the news sounds great, because I was thinking we needed money. Our pensions are suffering, right? He said, everybody says how great it is, how much money we've made. He said, but what's happened is people have only so much expendable income, so they no longer are going out to dinner and tipping that waitress. They're now buying their pot. So all we did is we shifted one amount of funding to a different place. So yeah, there's $200 million of new tax revenue from marijuana, but we lost it on other things. And the people who were counting on it lost it as well. He said to me, and I'm going to say it to you guys because you know this is true, he said, if you want to get more money for your state, get more people working and get them on a higher wage. We know that's how the answer to get more money. But I digress. He went on to say to me, recreational marijuana has been the worst thing that's ever happened. Crime rate is way up. In fact, the city of Denver, their crime rate, while all other major cities' crime rates were going down, Denver's went up. Car thefts were up 30 to 40%. I don't remember the exact number now. And the reason car thefts were up were not because people were stealing cars and needed cars. They were stealing the cars to ram them into the smoke shops to steal the material, the product, and get out and leave the stolen car in the place so that they didn't have any record of who stole it. He said teen usage in his state is up. We don't want teen usage. He said folks getting kicked out of the military is up. Homelessness is up. Unemployment is up. While the rest of the country is doing better with unemployment, they're struggling there. And then he said lastly, but you know what the biggest deal was for us? The Mexican drug cartels are moving into our state like they never have before because they want the supply chains. They want to be the folks in control. Guys, this sounds all good. There's a lot of ramifications that when we get down that path, and we've taken path after path after path, we're going to look back and say, ooh, look, let's help those who are sick. Doctors prescribed, pharmacy filled. Until we're there, we're not there yet. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the lady from Meade 27 for discussion of the matter.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to call Amendment 13, please.
Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Floor Amendment 13 to House Bill 136.
Lady from Meade.
Yes, sir. So basically what I'm asking for is on page 9, line 18, there's a definition or a board that's actually requested to be filled or formed. And so what I would like to do is to be more specific about the board members that would be on, the members that would be on that board. There would be 2 patient advocates, the director of the Office of Drug Control Policy or his or her designee, the executive director of the Kentucky Board of Dentistry or his or her designee, the executive director of the Kentucky Board of Medical Licensure or his or her designee, the executive director of the Kentucky Board of Nursing and his or her designee, the executive director of the Kentucky Board of Optometric Examiners or his or her designee, the executive director of the Kentucky Board of Podiatry or his or her designee, and the commissioner of the Department of, obviously, the state police or a designee. And so what I would like also is for the Department of Public Health and a board of physicians and advisors to actually appoint these members as opposed to the generic members that are actually listed for the board right now. So if there's no discussion, I would like to call for the adoption.
Motion made and seconded for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 13. Is there any debate or discussion? Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is an amendment that I received late last evening. And so we have adopted an amendment a few moments ago. I think it was from the gentleman from Laurel. I think it was Floor Amendment 11. And what Floor Amendment 11 did is it remove dentists, podiatrists, and optometrists from the list of professionals that could be certify the patients to use medical marijuana. And so this is an amendment that is now, because of that amendment that we just adopted, not when it was filed, but now it's a nonsensical amendment and would harm the bill, I don't think, for any reason. I do want to note what it's replacing, though, is a board of 13 with 8 physicians that have to be in one of the professionals that are on page 9. So 8 physicians, 4 patient advocates, and a pharmacist. So we already have a highly responsible, highly licensed, and respected board that exists today. And to adopt this floor amendment would add someone from the Board of Dentistry, Board of Optometric Examiners, and the Board of Podiatry, which we've just removed for the bill. So for that reason, I think this would make no sense to put in the bill, and I would urge a no vote.
Lady from Meade.
Yes, sir. May I speak, sir? And I agree. One of the things that, and I understand exactly where you're coming from, and I understand that, but at the same time, we are calling this medical marijuana. And so because of that responsibility, and, you know, this would put this board in line with other boards that we have in place currently.
Question for the body is on adoption of House Floor Amendment 13. Is there any further debate or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. No. Motion fails. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Are there no other people to speak? I do want to make a quick point, if I might. And I'll be very quick on this. There was a comment from my friend, the gentleman from Fayette County, about federal law, and I wanted to respond to that, if I might, and that is that since 2014, the United States Congress has adopted what's called the Rohrabacher-Farr rider to the appropriations bills that they pass at U.S. Congress. And what the Rohrabacher-Farr amendment does is it says that no dollar from the United States Department of Justice can be used to inhibit or interfere with state medical marijuana programs. So it's not exactly accurate to say the medical marijuana violates state laws, because Congress has said since 2014, and the House passed it again the United States Senate passed it again this year, and it's in that process, since 2014 that U.S. Department of Justice dollars cannot go to interfere with state medical marijuana programs.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Breathitt 91.
Permission to speak on the bill, Mr. Speaker.
You may proceed.
Thank you, sir. You know, we've got a drug problem in this state, and I checked with my law enforcement people, and they said the drug problem was meth, heroin, opiates, and in fact, they were in favor of not only medical marijuana, but adult use of cannabis. And I stand in here today and listen to you people go on about marijuana. And the gentleman from Fayette's right. There's coming a day, and I hope it's soon. We need to get out of the dark ages in Kentucky and join the rest of the nation. And I urge you to vote for this bill.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from LaRue 24.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield to a question?
He will yield.
Gentleman on page 49, I'll let you turn to it. And page 50. It starts on page 49, lines 26 through 27, page 50, lines 1 through 3. Was it your intent to have a floor but not a ceiling on the 15 cultivars licensed, 25 dispensaries, 5 processors, and 3 producers? It says at least.
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The intent here is to have 1 per ad district, and then allow the market, with the understanding that the regulator, the Department of Health, will make that decision, would allow the market to make other adjustments as necessary. For instance, in my hometown of Louisville, it's likely that we'll need more than 1 dispensary. And if we just did it by ad district, we may just get one. So that it is my intent to say there has to be 15. I believe this is a medication. I want it to be available to our people from New Madrid Bend to Black Mountain. One may not be enough per ad district. So yes, it is my intent to have 15 or these numbers as a minimum, and it could go up as the market demands.
Gentleman from LaRue.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for one more question?
He will yield another question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To go along those lines with the cultivators and the dispensaries and the processors and the producers, and we're also including the users here, to follow up from the gentleman from Christian 8's question on the ATFE form 4473, it states, warning, the use or possession of marijuana remains unlawful under federal law, regardless of whether it has been legalized or decriminalized for medicinal or recreational purposes in the state where you reside. The gentleman from Christian 8 asked about the card holders, but it looks like this would also apply to all those entities.
Gentleman from Jefferson.
I don't know that I understand the question. Are you saying that the entities can't own a gun? Can I ask for clarification, Mr. Speaker?
Gentleman from LaRue, can you clarify the question, please?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. On the form, it says if you are in use of marijuana or possession. So these entities, the cultivists, the dispensaries, the processors, and the producers, by this definition on this form, they are in possession. So are each of those individuals giving up their gun rights also?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that's a good question. I assume that you were setting me up with your first one. But I think my understanding is the answer is no. And the best evidence for that is they're in 34 states. And I've heard of, and I've spoken with a number of folks who run dispensaries in other states, and I've heard of none of them losing their gun rights. So that's Exhibit A, I would say. Exhibit B is the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment. Again, the United States Department of Justice cannot use any dollars that they've been appropriated by the United States Congress to interfere with medical marijuana programs. Part of that would be the gun rights of owners of dispensaries and cultivators and the like.
Gentleman from LaRue.
Mr. Speaker, may I speak on the bill?
Yes, sir.
I called the division of ATFE this morning in Louisville, and I asked for a clarification of this type of language, and they said if you answer yes to that question, which would mean possession of or use of marijuana remains unlawful under federal law regardless of whether it has been legalized or decriminalized for medicinal or recreational purposes in the state where you reside. If you answer yes to that question, this form stops, and they take it up right then, and they do not proceed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the lady from Muhlenberg 15 for discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to call up floor amendment number 3, please.
Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Floor Amendment 3 to House Bill 136.
Lady from Muhlenberg.
House Floor Amendment 3 simply would prohibit the advertising of medicinal cannabis sales in print, broadcast, online, by paid in-person solicitation of customers, or by any other advertising device as defined in KRS 177830, which is the prohibition of the advertising for tobacco products. Except in this paragraph, shall not prevent appropriate signs on the property of a licensed cannabis business, listings in business directories, including phone books, listings in trade or medical publications, or sponsorship of health or not-for-profit charity or advocacy events. Unfortunately, when we get things in the culture, kids have access to it, and we just don't want to advertise that and make it quicker or more enticing to them. So I would ask for its adoption.
Motion is for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 3. Is there any discussion? Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the lady from Muhlenberg for bringing this amendment. It is a friendly amendment. I don't think they ought to be advertising. You need to get this from your physician. I only wish we could rewind the clock and disallow opioids from prescribing or from advertising their poison on us, and maybe our families wouldn't be in such disarray and destruction that we're in today. And so one of the reasons that we're bringing House Bill 136 forward is because of the destruction that these pain medications have wrought on our communities. And so we support this amendment. We only wish that we could have more responsible players in the prescription industry world, and dare I say it, the Food and Drug Administration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Motion is for the adoption of House Floor Amendment 3. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, those in favor signify by voting aye. Those opposed, nay. House Floor Amendment 3 is adopted. Lady from Muhlenberg.
May I speak on the bill, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, ma'am.
I am very conflicted over this issue. I come from the healthcare world, and I want to help people. I have constituents who want this, and I believe that it could have benefits. And I commend the gentleman from Jefferson. I believe his heart's in the right place. But when I read this bill, it's the first bill that I read that it just felt wrong reading it because you're fighting the fact that it's against federal law. I have been encouraging my constituents, people that have been contacting me, to contact Washington to try to get the FDA to do its job, change the schedule, do the testing. I have somebody asked me, said, well, didn't you vote for Right to Try? Yeah, I did. But Right to Try has a terminal diagnosis, and you have to have used every other option for treatment, and whatever you use in a Right to Try drug has to have had at least one of those federal tests, one of the 3 that are required to make a drug appropriate and for use by the federal government. And I feel like that there's big money behind stopping this. That's not happened. I do have the concerns, the gentleman from Fayette, my very capable intern pulled up some articles. An article from Pennsylvania, legalizing pot doesn't come without societal cost. And I know we're not talking about that, but I feel like we may be headed there. And it says, just like, look at Colorado. And it says 1 in 5 youth, the use for first-time use is up, 1 in 10 in young adults. It talks about frequent marijuana users make riskier decisions. I just think we need to think long and hard about it. So I encourage everyone not to vote for this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Woodford for discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield to a question, please?
He will yield.
Thank you very much. It's my understanding that there's going to be freestanding dispensaries. There's going to be dispensaries that'll have advertising on them about come here for the medical cannabis. And so there's going to be a transaction. There's going to be a credit card or cash. Is that correct?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Yes, sir.
Gentleman from Woodford.
Will the gentleman yield to another question, please?
He will yield.
Thank you. Is there anything in your bill that deals with that dispensary owner's ability to legally deposit that cash in a federally insured bank?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
There's nothing in the bill that addresses that. I think underlying the question, though, is the question of can these companies bank? And the answer to that is yes, they are in 34 states, and so are the states banking that money as well. I know they can put it in community credit unions. Thank you, in credit unions, but there's not a problem in these other states. I think that's something that's been resolved in the 24 years that states have had medical marijuana.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Woodford. Thank you. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Greenup 98 for discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the sponsor from Jefferson 33 a question, please.
He will yield to a question. Gentleman from Greenup.
When you gave your introduction a minute ago, you said that this person gave you 7 criteria. Can you name them?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
For this bill to be, the Kentucky bill being above the other ones?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have those in front of me. He did testify to them. He mentioned all 7 of them. They were about the safety of the program. Many of them were about testing. So in this bill, we have some money that goes to a Kentucky university for testing and research. Some of them were about making sure that that's for research. They're also for testing to make sure that the product is tested by an independent safety tester, which we have. And I know at least one of them was about making sure that the products were properly labeled with all the things that are in the product, which is also there. So the 7 things that we have in the bill that they look for, we have a lot more than that, obviously. I think he testified that the best state that currently has, he thinks 4 or the most 5 arguably, but ours would have all 7. I can't list them today, gentlemen from Greenup, but he testified to them, and I think you were in that committee room.
Gentleman from Greenup.
May I ask the gentleman from Jefferson 33 another question?
He will yield to a question.
in the bill, it talks about terpenoids. What are terpenoids?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
All right, let me go back to biology class or whatever. They are part of the plant. I mean, if the gentleman from Greenup is going to get into a scientific conversation with me, I assure you, you're going to win that one. But what terpenes are, they are part of the plant that is being studied, and that's why it's so important that we have the University of Kentucky, perhaps, or maybe Western, whatever Kentucky University gets it, study the plant more. Does that answer your question sufficiently?
Gentleman from Greenup.
Yes, I'd like to speak on the bill, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Speaker. Thank you, my friend from Jefferson 33. I want to make a statement. I'm not against marijuana as a chemical to be used for human use if it helps people. But I know there's a process of research and development which has protected people ever since we had sulfanilamide. There's over 600 compounds in that plant, and there's over 50 THC. We need more research, we need more time. And as long as it's Schedule 1, that's going to be delayed. We need a good product. We need one that's safe and effective, and one that doesn't hurt anyone. So let me go on to speak about something else. You know, marijuana is being called some things that I've never said before on the floor. Could be KT or K2 or spice. So why did we outlaw K2 and spice? Because when they go to the marijuana receptor, they're 100 times more effective and stronger, so they kill people. So if you got artificial marijuana out there where you locate marijuana, you're going to have the threat of that being out there. So that gives people the inappropriate literature or the talk for kids. And at what age does the brain quit developing? We got a doctor of psychiatry here, and if I'm wrong, tell me. 25, most research, right? The brain? This marijuana affects the brain by lowering IQ with chronic use in children. So why would we put the bill at 18 years of age when we know the brain's not fully developed at 25? The data. I gave you a lot of data on HCR. There's a lot of data out there. And there's a lot of data from JAMA. If you really look at it, it's going to tell you that most of the research is inefficient. This one here, everybody's seen it. Even the person that testified in the community seen it from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. In the last paragraph, after they evaluated over 20,000, said, after they talked about nausea and vomiting, after they talked about pain symptoms, after they talked about MS, it said, for all these conditions, the effects of cannabinoids are modest. For all other conditions evaluated, there is inadequate information to access their effects. We need more research, we need more time, and we need to take it away from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2. So there is data. I went to committee today, and a few things were brought up during committee, and you all can relate to them. Someone talked about Christianity, someone talked about constitutionality, and someone talked about legality. Let's talk about it here. It is Schedule 1 by federal law, so that makes it illegal. So that's the legality about it. It just said they couldn't use money against the states. But if you have a product out here that's not grown legally, the DEA can burn it. They do it all the time out west. If I'm a pharmacist and I sell DEA products, Schedule 2, I ended up in prison. So the legality of it is, if it's Schedule 1, it's still Schedule 1. The second thing is the Constitution. So we all say we'll defend the Constitution and follow the laws of the Constitution and of the state of Kentucky. If the law in the Constitution says it's Schedule 1, then it's Schedule 1. Has it been changed? Now let me get you to my own personal Christianity. So we've talked about constitutionality and legality. In 1970, I started in pharmacy as an intern. And at the same time, I took an oath that I would protect the Constitution and follow the laws, which meant the Controlled Substance Act was being written that year. And I followed that law for 45 years, really 50 years now. I never broke that DEA law. Now, this don't have anything with data. This don't have anything with case reports. This really don't have anything to do with that bill, except my own integrity. I didn't break the law for 45 to 50 years, and I never had a citation from the DEA or from the State Board of Pharmacy. Y'all understand? So why should I vote yes today and break my own integrity? Thank you, Speaker.
Chair recognizes the lady from Floyd 95 for discussion of the matter.
Question for the sponsor.
He will yield.
Yield to the question. Thank you. If this bill passes and medical marijuana is prescribed to a patient, will any of their costs be covered by any sort of health insurance coverage?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Unfortunately, no. And that's one of the reasons that we've tried in this bill to put as many things as we could to protect those who are indigent. For instance, we wanted to keep the taxes off of them on the retail level and as low as possible on the excise level. We also want the applicants for a license to include in their applications ways they're going to make this available to folks who are indigent. And I would also note that's one of the reasons that I wanted smoke in the bill, and also self-grow, home grow, which have been taken out of the bill. But one of the things that I've had to do, the gentleman from Fleming and I have had to do it every time we've made a concession, is wonder how many people are we taking this away from. But the answer to your question is, unfortunately, very unfortunately, insurance and Medicaid do not cover the cost.
Okay, thank
Lady
you.
from Floyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's all I had. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Jefferson 46 for discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman, could I ask the gentleman a question, please?
He will yield to a question.
Gentleman from Jefferson, can you tell me how many overdose deaths we've had with marijuana?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Did you ask marijuana or the thousands we've had in opioids?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Can I ask a follow-up question, please, Mr. Speaker?
I don't think I answered it.
He will yield to a question.
Gentlemen, I think you just answered the question vaguely, my next question, but do you have any idea of any numbers on overdose deaths with opioids?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
You know, obviously the gentleman from Jefferson and I have talked about this before, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. We're talking about thousands per year. Some in my family, gentlemen. The answer to the marijuana question is I'm not aware of any. There may be some marijuana that's laced with other things, and that's why this bill is very important, because we have it safety tested here. And so I think that answers your question. There have been thousands of opioid overdoses. And I want to say, because I think it's related to your question, gentleman from Jefferson, and that's this. One of the reasons that we're doing this is because it reduces the addiction on opioids. Anywhere we've seen from 8% to 24%. There was a study reported in the Journal of American Medical Association last summer, gentleman from Jefferson, from a professor at the University of Kentucky. And it said that in states that have medical marijuana, the prescription rates of opioids go down 8%. So what is that saying? What that's saying is that when physicians in these medical marijuana states have an option, 8%, that's not 100%, but it's 1 out of 12, are going to a different option for their patients than opioids.
Gentleman from Jefferson 46.
Thank you, gentlemen from Jefferson. Can I speak on the bill, please?
Yes, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, I had a speech prepared today. I prepared that speech in 2017 when I came down here. This is a very, very important issue to me. And it's going to be very, very difficult for me to talk today. I'm not going to give you that speech. I'm just going to talk from the heart. In 1993, I was involved in an accident and was forced to fight for my life And I made it, and there was a gentleman who, he was a good one-arm golfer. And he came to my hospital bed, and he saved my life. Before I walked on this floor today, I got a text, and he passed away. So this is going to be a very difficult speech for me today, but I have to give it. So please bear with me if I fight through emotions. This gentleman saved my life because he introduced me to disabled golf. That was what I needed to build self-confidence and self-pride that my life wasn't over, that my new life has just begun, which is exactly what he told me. And he told me not to focus on what I couldn't do, but focus on what I can do. And it was just greatest advice in the world for anybody in here. So he introduced me to disabled golf, and I went around the country and I played disabled golf. It was awesome. I met the greatest people in the world that overcome their obstacles, all kinds of disabilities. And I got heavily involved with that sport and have been heavily involved for over 25 years, still am. But when I went around to these golf tournaments, there was something very similar to, I played along amputees and people with spinal cord injuries, call it brachial-plexus, where they may have an arm, but no real use out of it. Well, the amputees and these spinal cord injury patients had a similar challenge. It's chronic nerve pain. In every one of those lives, golf affected them like it did me. It gave them something, a real sense of usefulness and credibility, and that motivation that tells you that your life's not over, you can still do great things, you can still inspire a lot of people. And I love that organization because of that. But they had to overcome their pain to be able to participate in the sport. And there's one thing most of them had. You know, there were all kinds of different levels of pain. Some of them didn't require treatment. I was fortunate. I have issues myself, have for a long time, but they haven't been so substantial that I needed medication on an everyday use yet. But everybody had these little pills in their golf bags, these little pill bottles, and they were full of pills. That's what they gave to us in the 1990s. And I met so many really, really good friends and good people, and something started happening. People started disappearing from the golf tournaments, small numbers, but and you would ask, what happened to so-and-so, what happened to so-and-so, why aren't they coming anymore? A lot of times nobody knew. Sometimes they'd say, well, you know, so-and-so went through this, and they went through this, and just terrible stories, which I won't get into. I would later come to find out it's opioid addiction. I stand here today saying that was an FDA-approved drug, by the way. It was probably the most terrible decision by the American medical industry to treat long-term chronic pain in that fashion. And now we're dealing with it. And we will be dealing with this for a long time in all of our communities. We all know that. What I'm getting to is there were a lot of success stories in the early 2000s, middle 2000s. People started coming back and they told stories of their battles and some of the things they dealt with. And they were so happy. They were back with their family, in their jobs, and they were productive citizens, and they were playing golf again. And I asked, you know, what is it? What is it? Well, they were on medical marijuana programs. I'm no doctor. I'm no pharmacist. I don't know why we have those success stories. But I do know this. I know a lot of people that use it. And I'm talking about people that are very successful people. When I started working on this piece of legislation with the gentleman from Fleming, I learned a lot more about it. And people came from all different directions to tell me that they use it and they use it illegally and nobody knows. I was blown away by how many people came and shared that private information with me. And they say, please, whatever you do, keep working on what you're doing. Do something for us. So I'm not going to talk much longer about this. All I'm going to say is that of all these people that I know that used it, I haven't heard any deaths or any horrific health problems from this. I can't say that about that FDA drug that they gave us because I did know a few of those. So, like any drug, like any medicine, it works for some others, it may not be the best thing. But let's let the patient and their caregiver make that decision. I think they're capable of doing that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the lady from Grayson 18 for discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentleman from Jefferson entertain a question on the bill?
He will yield to a question.
A big concern of mine throughout this process has been how patients are able to pay for this medicine once it's been prescribed. On page 37, section 7, it states that all registry identification card fees collected by the department pursuant to subsection 5 of this section shall be forwarded to the Medical Cannabis Trust Fund established in section 31 in this act. My question for the gentleman, are the funds in the trust fund sweepable? Can they be used for something else for government purposes?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Well, I'm not sure that I know the answer to that. I don't think that funds that are for like the Board of Nursing, for instance, say that they're sweepable or not, but I think they are swept regularly. I think their recommendation to sweep them this year. So I don't think it's prohibited in this bill, but you've pointed out something that may need to be improved in the Senate.
Lady from Grayson.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Jefferson.
I've just been informed by someone much smarter than me that they're not sweepable because they're allocated to the grant program.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Perry 84 for further discussion on the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield to a question, please?
He will yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Gentleman from Jefferson, I know that this bill does not have CASPR because a Schedule 1 cannot be reported to the CASPR system, which is a document basically that the doctors, pharmacists, law enforcement can view a CASPR. What is the program that is set up in this bill that is likened to the CASPR system? What's it called?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, gentleman from Perry. I appreciate the question. This is something that's very important to me, is that the law enforcement, the physician, the pharmacist, the dispensary, and everyone that is in the Department of Health have access to this information. And I'll also note that CASPR is a program that Kentucky has. Most states, almost all states, use a third-party provider, which is actually also from Kentucky. And so what this bill would do would be to say, if the Department of Health cannot use CASPR, and it's not, my understanding, not decided that they can't, but if they can't, then they will just go to a third-party provider, which is what most states do instead of CASPR for all their CASPR-like needs anyway.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Perry.
Mr. Speaker, will he yield to another question, please?
He will yield.
Gentleman from Jefferson, what's the cost to the state of Kentucky for this program?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
The cost of the state of the program should be zero, gentlemen from Perry. Again, what I asked LRC to do was to come up with an excise tax and licensing fees arrangement that would break even and pay for the administration and regulation while not making any money.
Gentleman from Perry.
Will he yield to one more, please?
He will yield to another question.
So this Casper-like program is going to cost zero to the state?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
The Casper-like program, I think they would, and the Department of Health would put some meat on these bones, but they would contract, and I think the Casper-like program would make money when they require the dispensaries and the entities that are going to use the program to pay the fee to use it. So I don't think it would cost the state anything for usage and for contracting, other than what it would cost to bid the project.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Perry.
Thank you, gentleman from Jefferson. May I speak on the bill, please?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, this, I know this is a subject that pulls at the heartstrings. It's a bill that is a lot of political pressure from the outside. If you ask the general question, the broad question to all of Kentucky, and you said, are you for medical marijuana? Most people would say, yes, we are for medical marijuana, because I think all of Kentucky wants to help those who are sick. But if you ask the question to the general public, people, just everyday people, are you for medical marijuana that's not regulated by the FDA? Then the answer changes. The Federal Food and Drug Administration is responsible for protecting the public health by ensuring the safety, efficiency, and security of human and veterinary drugs, biological products, and medical devices, and by ensuring the safety of our nation's food supply, cosmetics, and products that emit radiation. Marijuana, no matter how we look at it, is against federal law. It's a Schedule I narcotic, along with LSD, heroin, ecstasy, peyote, and other illegal narcotics. If you ask the public, would you be for medical marijuana if a doctor could not prescribe it? Then most people would say, no, if a doctor cannot prescribe it, I don't think that would be safe for those who are getting it. If a medical doctor in Kentucky prescribed medical marijuana, it would be a violation of their DEA license, which is a federal license, and they would be stripped of their license. I know that in this law it says a written recommendation, and that's a way of us skirting around the federal law. I understand that. But if you ask the people of Kentucky, are you for medical marijuana that cannot be prescribed by a physician, that cannot be prescribed by a doctor or filled by a pharmacist, would they still be for medical marijuana? Would they be for medical marijuana if you asked them the question, would you be for medical marijuana if your insurance didn't pay for it, or if your state Medicaid wouldn't pay for it? Would you be for medical marijuana if it was not approved by the FDA? My question is even farther than that. How can a doctor, pharmacist, or other people be protected in House Bill 136 for prescribing an illegal drug, marijuana, if a doctor prescribes or recommends an illegal drug like marijuana that is unapproved or unregulated by the FDA? How in the world could they not be held liable civilly if the person they recommend it to, or the family of those they recommend it to, is harmed by that recommendation? How do we as legislators think we have the ability to know what medicine is good for the public or not? I was in law enforcement. You're a lawyer. Many of you are lawyers. We come from all walks of life. Probably the only few that are in here that could say this would be good or not good is one would be our gentleman friend from Greenup County, gentleman from Warren County. How can 138 legislators in a legislative body say, yeah, this is good for our public. Let's let doctors recommend it because they can't prescribe it. Let's let dispensaries dispense it because pharmacists can't give it out. Why have we got that authority? How do we have that authority? If I ask the general public, did you know that medical marijuana is a cash-only or credit card business that most banks in Kentucky can't take the proceeds from because they're federally licensed? Most people in Kentucky would say, that sounds fishy to me. From my law enforcement background, if you look at Senate Bill 1 that's coming to us soon, we are encouraging law enforcement of Kentucky to work with the federal agents in enforcing federal law in cities that would be sanctuary cities. But in House Bill 136, we're saying to our local law enforcement and Kentucky State Troopers, don't worry about the marijuana Schedule 1 deal. We don't want you to enforce that part. What does that send our law enforcement? We wonder why people don't want to be in law enforcement anymore. Is it really about retirement? Is it really about pay? Is it really about, or is it the lack of support really because of bills like this look, the state police, I don't know what the upper echelon says about House Bill 136. But from talking to people who are retired from the marijuana suppression team, who have given their life to fight drugs, marijuana included, they're not for this bill. They're not in support of this. For us to make people believe that the law enforcement community is for House Bill 136 is very misleading. I've dealt with everything, every kind of drug you could imagine. Oxycontin, IRs, Scuds, Lorcet, Percocet, Valium, Xanax, methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin. The result of those drugs that I just named, broken lives, broken homes, kids without dads, moms that left their children, murders, fatal accidents, domestics, suicide by hanging, suicide by shooting, suicide by cop, deaths or injuries to police officers, firemen, EMS workers, overcrowded jails. But the underlying common denominator of all those opioids, ask any police officer, ask these troopers out here. Go to the people that's working the drug details. Go to the people that's working the streets. And you ask them, when you talk to somebody that's been on opioids, what was their gateway drug? Liquor and marijuana. 99 times out of 100. If we put this in cabinets of the bathrooms of people across Kentucky, then we're opening up a new level of addiction to young people because they'll see it's medicine, they'll think it won't harm them, and they are exposed to a level of THC which is going to damage them for life, possibly. Now, I'm not insensitive to the hurts and sicknesses of others. In 1985, I lost my dad to cancer. And I know what it's like to see somebody lay there and beg to live. I know what it's like to have somebody beg, please help me. I know what it's like to be mistaken for a doctor My dad thought we was doctors coming into the living room to check. I know I'm not insensitive to that. I buried a man 2 weeks ago from my church that died from cancer. After my dad died in 1985, a state police sergeant by the name of Charlie Cornett took me under his wings. In 2009, he got liver cancer. Charlie was the sergeant that everybody went to. He had 45 or 50 boys that he had got into the State Police Academy. He had a whole bunch of good troopers. He fought against marijuana, the cultivating of it. He fought it day and night. When it came down time for him to almost die, the doctor said, "Charlie, we can get you some medical marijuana, and that'll help you." And he said, "I fought that stuff all my life, and I'll not take it now." I'm not insensitive to that. But I also know the negative impact that marijuana has had on all the people across the state of Kentucky. Again, if it was regulated by the FDA, if it was researched and could help people, if it was to where a doctor could prescribe it and a pharmacist could dispense it, then I'd be a yes on it. But it's not there yet. A gentleman from Greenup did a House resolution just a couple weeks ago to urge the FDA to do just that. And the majority of us voted for that. I'm against this bill not because I'm not for helping people, but I'm against this bill because it's a step that we don't want to take toward recreational marijuana in the future. And I would urge this body to vote no on House Bill 136. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Laurel for further discussion of the matter.
Mr. Speaker, I was going to refrain from speaking, but this is an emotional issue for me. I've raised my little brother with cerebral palsy. He's 42 years old. Since before he was 30 years old, he's had Parkinson's-like symptoms from the anticonvulsants and the antipsychotics that he takes to control his seizure disorder and his behavior disorder from the brain damage. And worldwide, there are products available worldwide that's been approved and went through the research, and there's studies that suggest that there's clinical significant benefit for those conditions that I asked you to vote on earlier. One of the conditions that he has. And if I can give him a little bit of relief from the FDA-approved medication that has caused those adverse side effects for him to control those conditions, I'm going to do it. I have to do it. I'm his guardian. I have custody of him. I watch him suffer on a regular basis. I watch him be so embarrassed to talk to new people that don't know him, that he holds his hand because it shakes so much. And some of you folks have met him. You've seen him. And because the FDA, like some folks have said in here, are dragging their feet, political, financial, whatever's holding them back from doing it to allow the research to be done to bring these products to the market. Why are we going to continue to keep those barriers up for people like my little brother? Now, I've taught substance abuse prevention education over 100,000 students all across the Commonwealth. One of the main drugs I talk to them about, the misuse and abuse of marijuana. The misuse and abuse. But you know what I also talk to them about? Over-the-counter prescription and illegal drugs. And you talk about in your medicine cabinet, one of the most deadly medications I talk to them about, one that every single one of you probably have in your house right now, cough medicine, dextromethorphan. Our children, middle school, high schoolers, they're overdosing, they're dying, psychosis, coma, death. It's not the medication, it's the misuse and the abuse. And that's what it comes down to. This bill is extremely stringent. The conditions behind it, this is going to be the most strict program in the nation. We owe it to these people like my little brother, and everyone else that's suffering because of those FDA medications that are causing those adverse side effects. We owe it to them to give them something that could possibly give them some relief and maybe not cause those symptoms in the next person's little brother. So I urge you, vote yes for this bill today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, gentlemen. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Woodford for further discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield to a question, please?
He will yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are ways to obtain the medical marijuana in the bill, and I'm just wondering if you could tell me if there are limits to how many prescriptions someone is able to either give or have filled, please.
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are the limits in the bill. Many states don't have limits. We decided as another restriction we'd put limits not only of the potency of the product, but also the amount that someone could get, and that is a month-long need, whatever they need for a month, so they don't have to go back to the dispensary too often, but nothing more than that.
Gentleman from Woodford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield to another question, please?
He will yield.
As a former employer, I'm just wondering, does your bill address anything as it relates to a drug-free workplace, please?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It does. The employer has the full ability to make the determination as to whether or not they're going to allow any of their employees to have medical marijuana cards. Or better stated, I should say, is if someone has a medical marijuana card, whether they're going to allow them to work in that location. This is another concession that I do not like. In my district is Ford Truck Plant. It makes perfect sense that Ford Truck Plant would make a decision that they wouldn't have someone with a medical marijuana card work at Ford Truck Plant. That's obviously a good thing. But it doesn't make as much sense if someone works perhaps at a less dangerous location where there's no, or there's very little opportunity for them to harm themselves or others. But because we needed to move this thing forward, we've adopted the language that was given to us by the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce entirely, and that decision is made by the employer.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Woodford. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Greenup, 98, for further discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the sponsor yield to a question?
He will yield.
If the bill is enacted, how many people do you think after 1 year will be enrolled with your cards?
Gentleman from Jefferson.
How many people will be enrolled in the program?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that, gentleman.
Gentleman from Greenup.
Just discuss the bill a little bit.
Yes, sir.
If you take the other states and use ratio and proportion, it's like about 30,000 in Connecticut, ratio of proportion. Kentucky had, with our population, probably about 50,000. That's what it should be. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question before the body is House Bill 136, amended by House Committee Substitute 1, House Floor Amendments 3, 5, 8, 10, 11, 14, 15, and 17. Any further discussion? Seeing none, clerk will sound the chimes. Those in favor signify by voting aye. Those opposed, nay, and the roll call is open for your vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change or explain their vote? Chair recognizes the gentleman from Breathitt, 91, for explanation of vote not to exceed 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was proud to vote yes. Also, statistically, if you look at the National Institute for Drug Abuse, No one has ever died from overdose of marijuana. We have 6 people per day who die from alcohol poisoning and 126 people per day who die from overdose of opiates. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the lady from Mercer 55 for explanation of vote not to exceed 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to draw the public's attention to my no vote on the board when we address these intended and non-intended consequences in the future. We talked about those today and offered a very good resolution to that. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Fleming for explanation of vote not to exceed 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the gentleman from Jefferson 33 for all his hard work. I know this has consumed him and his family over the past several months. Today, I cast my yes vote in honor of Mr. Eric Crawford sitting in the back of the chamber with us. For him. When I first came here, I didn't know the first thing about marijuana, never did use it in high school, even tried. They educated me, and I listened. And all over the time, the past 4 years, I have not had one single person come to me and tell me marijuana has destroyed their life or their family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the lady from Warren 20 for explanation of vote not to exceed 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Briefly explain my vote.
Yes, ma'am.
Today, this body has done something that will bring relief to many of our citizens in the Commonwealth. And today, I've kept my promise. The surprise when I ran for this office was how many people at the doors said to me, "I've just got one thing to ask you." And it was this thing. I talked to desperate mothers, fathers, grandparents, caregivers, children who just wanted to help someone they loved. Today we have done that. We've taken a major step. I want to thank the people of my district and all the people who've come through my office for educating me and for making this happen today. They have shown that they have the power. I dedicate this to the people of my district, and I cast my yes vote in memory of Roger Pruitt.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Jefferson 43 for explanation of vote not to exceed 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to explain my vote, I am proud to be a part of what is certainly an historic, her historic, our historic, their historic moment. I just wanted to add my voice. We shared in committee about this bill. It's been discussed for years. I was a staffer for LRC. I was in government contracts. I'd watch committees after committee where people would come from across the Commonwealth and share their really heartfelt stories, the trauma they experienced, and how this would help them. And I told Mr. Eric, my brother in the back, that his life was not in vain. His testimony is not in vain. Him pressing through and showing up here every day was not in vain. And the gentleman from Laurel, your work is not in vain either. So for your brother, for Eric, for the people of this Commonwealth that deserve this moment, I'm proud to vote yes.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Greenup 98 for explanation of vote not to exceed 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I said that water was safe, most people would say it is, but you can drown from water. I've heard people say that marijuana doesn't kill you because there's no documented overdoses. However, the lady from Mercer, is that Kim? She brought up drug interactions. There is people who were on Coumadin, smoking marijuana, hemorrhaged out. So that is a death. They hadn't been on marijuana, they wouldn't have died. And on cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, people have been dehydrated from that, from vomiting so much, so there's been people die from that. So I just wanted to make that as public account, and that's the reason I voted no.
All members voted. Clerk will take the roll. There being 65 members voting aye, 30 members voting nay, House Bill 136 is passed. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the gentleman from Fleming and myself, I move.
Without objection, clinchers applied.
Title amendment. Sorry. Move for the pass title amendment.
Clerk, please report.
House Committee Amendment 1, the title amendment to House Bill 136.
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Move for adoption of the title amendment.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Move for clencher.
Without objection, clenchers applied.